I have my cup here. I need to send him a thank you. Yeah.
Global inclusion and diversity as an expat woman. This is a really powerful topic, and on the occasion of Juneteenth, I couldn't have asked for a better guest to join me on stage than my founding member of the Expat Woman and principal of Living a Global Lifestyle, Lisa Mitchell. She has been on three of the Expat Woman shows. This will make her third one. She's been part of the Expat Woman and a founding member for many years now, and she has spoken in person very recently in San Francisco on the same topic, and it was so well received by the audience and so fascinating and so important that I asked Lisa if she would come back on the Expat Woman show and talk about navigating global inclusion and diversity as an expat woman. So without further ado, Lisa, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what you do, where you're based, and then we'll dive into the questions and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nina. Thank you so much for having me back. My name is Lisa Mitchell, Lisa R. Mitchell, and I'm the principal of Living a Global Lifestyle, a global community that I've created for expats, digital nomads, and world travelers to help you live your best life, especially as it pertains to managing your finances. Because for many years, besides being a perennial expat, digital nomad, and world traveler, I was an international banker helping people who want to live a global lifestyle or on their way or in the midst, helping them manage their finances. So I did that at Wells Fargo, and I did that at Citibank for many years before moving to China, to which was a bit of a career switch. People, and that's why people, a lot of people, when I was in San Francisco, I met up with my friends. They're like, "Oh, what are you in town for?" And they're like, "You're doing a speech on what?" So they were really surprised, and I'm like, a lot of people forget that when I went to China, I had a career switch, and I was basically a teacher, trainer, facilitator. I taught executives, senior managers, in not only Chinese, but Berlitz, who I taught for, is a global education company. And one of the reasons I was interested in it was because I wanted to have something else. I knew cross cultural communications for onboarding people, is a big issue. When I was in business school at Thunderbird, we all had to take the class, we all had to be certified. And so at Berlitz, one of the things they did, I wrote this down, they have a cultural orientation index that I became certified in to help people, become aware of their biases, how to communicate. Most of my clients were working in China, or most of my Chinese clients were going to be working overseas. So I do have a background in cross cultural communications and understanding. And as a female expat, I've been an expat since 1987, on and off, living in London twice, living in Vietnam, and then living in China. And in between that, doing business in Asia and Europe. So certainly, can speak about global inclusion and diversity. And not only that, I was thinking about it this morning. I also manage a global team, right? So I manage people in the US, I manage people in Europe, I manage people in Asia. I had men, I had women, I had different cultures, different religions. I had forgotten about all that, different ethnicities, different sexual orientations. I had to manage all of that in really three different workplaces, right? And the way that you and I started out by having this conversation a little bit was me saying, like, the first time living abroad, and people, living abroad in London, and people are like, "Oh, you're American." Right? When we're in America, usually people of color, that's not the first thing people say, right? And race is always an overriding factor. I said when I lived in Europe, I felt like it was always more gender, right? And when I lived in Asia, probably a little bit of both. What was interesting is when I was preparing, drilling down a little bit more for this presentation, and I did a bit more research, I found that that was actually valid. I looked at Harvard Business Review, wrote an article, and ERC, which is a huge trade organization for global mobility, they also did some studies, and I'll go over that later. I was pretty right on. Like in Europe, it's your Western Europe, it's your gender. Some countries it's your disability, and I'll go into a couple of examples where I actually saw that. So I was like, wow, I wasn't really that far off, because I don't only want to make it about I could certainly 30 years in, right? I could talk about my personal examples forever, and as I spend a lot of time always engaging in expat and digital nomad groups, there's a story there every day. There was just a story about someone. He was in the Dominican Republic, and he was going through security, and he was not only patted down like a TSA, but they asked him basically to get naked. And he was trying to figure out, well, has this happened to somebody else? Is it me? And some of the comments were very, very interesting. I've never been to the DR. I haven't spent that much time in the world. And a lot of it, people were saying, oh, well, we hate to say this, but what color is your skin? I would have never, and just some other conversations about culture and how other people are treated, and this was a man. And it's like, well, what do you do in that situation? Right? Do you say, I'm not going to do that? What are you, crazy? I'm not, and there was another situation. I think somebody, I don't know if this one is true, but during COVID, because when you work in China, you have to, and a lot of other countries, you have to do a medical. But I think when people were coming through the airport, they wanted them to do a more invasive exam, right? Usually you do the temperature check. Um, and what if you say no? What if I'm on a business trip and I can't say no, right? I always think about that, right? Because as I said, I used to travel, especially to Asia. I'm with my boss, I'm with the person who sales and business development. We usually stuck together, airports, whatever. But what if I'm singled out? What am I gonna, right? I'm gonna get naked? No, I'm not gonna do that, right? But I think, and something else I touch on, your first thing for good, bad, or indifferent in America, you would say, well, wait a minute, what's the law, right? It's rule of law. In other countries, you may not have that. And I think people don't really think about that. I hear a lot of people, especially since we're on the topic of immigration, while I was going through and this happened, I think people forget. I'm just going to talk about that a minute. Countries don't have to let you in. I always try to stress that to people. They forget. Somebody else just told the story about someone. They didn't know they were supposed to have yellow fever. They were going to Ghana, and she was chatting with him. They're making conversation, and then they got to immigration health check, and he didn't have his. And he started screaming, well, I have all these papers. Nobody told me about yellow fever. And they wouldn't let him in, and they detained him. And she was, she felt bad about it. She's like, but people were like, well, everybody, even I just asked somebody about that because I was thinking about going to Ghana in January, and they were like, yellow fever. And they were like, you need to get your visa. So the people forget, people don't need to let you into their country. People don't need to be, because I spend a lot of time listening to expats, and they're like, well, I want to go to a country that has this, this, and this. And it has to be this, this, and this. And I really also don't know if there's a perfect country or if there's a perfect place. And it's great when you have a choice, but what if you don't have a choice? What if you move to a country for love, right? Or your livelihood is dependent on it, right? What are you going to do? And I think people kind of don't think about that, especially we're in this whole digital nomad visa. We have a lot more freedom.
Right.
So, but I always try to get people to think about that. So that's kind of my background and kind of what I was thinking. But it was interesting to see that the examples I had given, there was some research behind that.
Very cool. So great, and thanks for sharing all that, and also looking. I think doing research before going to a country, whether you're traveling or you are, visit. I mean, planning to move there is important. Now, on the topic of Juneteenth, so we'll talk a little bit about you sharing about Juneteenth because we have a very international audience. So, and maybe even some people in the US aren't aware of it. And I also had a question with relate because Juneteenth, in terms of what what is the like the appropriate, what is it, African Americans, is, do you call people black, do you call Americans, because it's such a confusing name and you don't know what is and for immigrants or expats, when you
Right.
come
That's a
here,
good. That's a very good point, because like my mom's family is from Jamaica, right? So I have people in my family who don't want to be called African American. They are like black, right?
okay,
So, um, I think for me, you just you hit on an important topic. I think first of all, you need to know the lay of the land. You need to know that some people prefer being called African American. Some people prefer being called Black. You could even ask someone. I think sometimes the most important thing is to not know words that maybe I find with most expats to avoid words that may be taboo or not accepted. That's more important. No one is, I'm not going to yell at you if you call me Black. Although you remind me of, I hate to keep with these stories, my story, London, right? Remember, I don't know if you remember, I'll just say it again. Um, Working in a big bank, and the manager, he called me colored. Now, in the US, with segregation and everything in the South, people were called colored. People may not remember, it's a global audience. You can look it up. Segregation, Jim Crow laws, colored water fountains, things like that. So it has and especially, I mean, my dad's from the South. I consider myself a Northerner. Sorry, Mitchell family. Um, so colored, I had a very visceral reaction to it. However, he is from South Africa, right? And this is apartheid was still going on. So calling someone who looks like me colored, he wouldn't know to call me African American or Black. But I was taken aback. I was like, whoa, what? I mean, this is like my first 2 weeks. I'm like, what's up with these people? Right. And I remember I asked, and I've had cousins, family members from England, so, but still, this is my first time living in London. And I remember kind of gingerly asking a colleague, and we both had our hair in braids. So what he said, oh, is you can ask so and so, Lisa, she's just like you. Now, also in the United States, we even though race is always an overriding factor, you wouldn't say, "Oh, she's Black like you." That wouldn't be considered polite. You would say, "Oh, she has braids like you do." Right? So that was the first thing that he referred to my race immediately. And I asked her, and she like it was not a big deal to her. Like it was like not like, "Oh, yes, he's a gentleman. He's oh, he isn't he great? Isn't he wonderful?" Looking at her like, "Are you kidding me? He's just called me colored." Not a big
Right.
deal to her, not and then I learned again, I met tons of Black British people. They are Black British, they are Black Caribbean. They also have different identity, right? They are Ghanaian British, they are Nigerian Brit, so it's we talked a little bit about it when I was in San Francisco, right? Sometimes it's how you say it or what you say. I'm not going to yell at anybody who, especially if they're from another country. But I
Right.
have had to tell expat friends, I think I told this story as well. She used the word mulatto. That's kind of a negative, but in maybe some of my other friends, that wouldn't be, or the other one, let me get off of African Americans, people of color. Um, People saying, and my friend, she always, Lisa, she's like, you're going too far. Um, People are Asian, rugs are Oriental,
Mm.
right? I hear that a lot. I used to hear that, and I'm like, no. And my friend would go, Lisa, you're taking this too serious. I just found, but again, sometimes it's tone. If people don't know, they don't know. So, but I think that's a really valid question. So that's
No,
just
you brought up a really good point because I think the US may be the most, I don't know, but maybe Canada too, but culturally, at least supposedly culturally sensitive and politically correct.
yeah, yeah,
So
politically
I
correct
think
is the
many
word I was
countries
thinking
that
of.
may not, there's racism and there's discrimination in all countries, like
Right.
even among its own people, right? But I
Yeah.
think sometimes it, as you said, it can be innocent because it might not have any negative connotations.
Mhm,
It's just a word, there's nothing behind it. And
mhm. Or
there
they
are,
may have what America's influence of music. Someone listening to rap music, right? We won't spend time on the N word. Somebody in some country who has no frame of reference, they think that's okay.
right, exactly. And
Right. We have
this
no frame of right. So
right. That's why I
I'm
think
a
it's an
yeah.
important discussion, because you can be culturally sensitive, but also, as you say, if you don't have any frame of reference and you're being totally innocent without
Mhm.
being racist,
Right.
it again, and I think that's why the research is so important when you move
It
to
is.
another country.
Yeah. It's
What
good.
doing as much as you can, because it's not whatever the race is, right? You like, for me, it's interesting. Like over here, when people refer to Native Americans as Indian, I get really confused, because
Ah, oh, I never thought about that one. Yeah.
yeah, we are the real Indians,
Right.
but
I know.
yeah, it's like, yeah, please call them Native Americans,
Yeah.
because it's too confusing. So, but
Right.
again, the way people say stuff, it all but we have so much more to discuss. So let me
We're
try
still
to,
in Juneteenth. Okay, Juneteenth.
yeah, so
Yeah, Juneteenth.
yeah, this topic is and that's why I had you back, because you shared so much.
Mhm.
So in terms of Juneteenth, maybe very briefly touch upon that, and then are there similar holidays in other countries
So
like Juneteenth? Yeah.
I did research that, and I'm going to keep it really brief because it's celebrated annually on June 19th to commemorate the ending of slavery in the United States. And I think we could keep it short because when I did my research, because there's some controversy because it's the Emancipation Proclamation, but some states didn't agree with that, and some people didn't get their freedom later, and the 13th Amendment, so it's bigger. I like the short and sweet. President Biden signed it into law in 2021, although some states were still giving it, but now it's federal law. And I like the fact that it's a commemoration, right? Like who knows if December 25th is the real day Christ was born. It's just the day that we celebrate it.
Right.
Um, they do have a holiday in Mexico. It's the Black, I'm reading right, Black Seminoles of Nacimiento. They hold a festival and reunion as Dia de los Negros. So that's Day Negros Black Dia Day. And then many former British colonies celebrate Emancipation Day on August 1st. And then the United Nations has also designated August 31st as the International Day for People of African Descent. I did find when I was looking initially last week, like Canada and some other places, but then I couldn't find the reference. So I didn't want to mention it.
And
Um,
I shared a few in. I just sent out the Expat Woman newsletter,
oh, okay. Yeah,
mentioning your talk on the Expat Woman show, and I did share a few more. I think Brazil has
yeah.
one, and a few others. I can't remember now, and I don't want to pull it up because people can. I'll link it in the
Don't
comments.
worry about it. And Brazil, what Brazil has the second law. It's interesting because I didn't find anything about Brazil, so I want to read that.
I
Has
use I use Chat GPT, so this
Oh,
is
that's okay. I didn't use well, I use ChatGPT for our titles, but I hear you. But that's
yeah, okay.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
we're
let's
yeah,
talk about the let's talk about best practices for diversity and inclusion around the globe, because, and
yeah,
I know you touched on that when you spoke in San Francisco,
yeah,
and how what we call diversity, equity, and inclusion, the US might be very different in another country.
right.
Right?
So
So,
that's
go ahead, Lisa.
Sure. So that's where I went and did some kind of deep research. And we know that DEI, the abbreviation, stands for diversity, equity, inclusion. And I actually found a couple more articles kind of talking about what I said, like, a lot of people think it's a US problem and it's the US exporting. But as we said, the issues of bias and discrimination are found everywhere. And then just the factors, the priority factors of what diversity and inclusion and equity should mean. Again, gender was top for Western Europe, Africa, and North America. Age was listed first in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. In Latin America, it was disability. And in Asia Pacific, it was considered culture. And then I always talk about some that people, well, I thought disability was interesting, right? Because in some countries, if you have a disability, you're hidden, right? You're hidden and you might not be protected. It's up to your family to take care of you, or you go to an institution. It's reminded me of a story. As I said, some countries you have to take a medical. One of my really good friends, she's an immigration attorney, so she was helping companies get visas and bring over their executives. And I remember one of the children was in a wheelchair. She was like, forget it. I forgot what country they were. And this was a while ago. It was like maybe 15, maybe over 10 years ago. She says, you'll never pass the medical. And you wonder, at the time, of course, I didn't ask her, but is that because it's looked as something negative, or having lived in a developing country, they just don't have the medical facilities. They don't have the infrastructure, right? So they don't want they like when I took my before I went to China and I went to see my doctor, and I was a little hesitant, a medical, the foreign country. And she says, well, China is probably worried if there are any communicable diseases, with the population. And look what happened with COVID, right? Like that, a global pandemic. Turns out she was right. So, that I thought these were good, that there was some research behind it, and I thought about disabilities because, in the US, we have hidden disabilities that people talk about. Or as this same friend told me, people will always, she's from South Africa actually. People may always find a way to discriminate against you. It may always be something. Remember, the same person, well, I'm not going to say that, but and I'm not a small person, is a very large person, which means nothing to me and you. But I watched how, when we were in China together, people reacted. And I never would have thought about that. I had someone within my company who was the same, and I just kind of watched how people treated her and the things they said about. I'm like, what does that have to do with her teaching ability? And are people, discriminating against her because of that?
Right.
So different countries, different things. I thought that was very interesting. I thought I was it wasn't just a feeling. When I'm in Europe, it always seems like gender. Um, in the U.S. and maybe other places, it can be, race can be the overriding things.
What about China? Because you lived in China, and I know people of color, even Indians or
Mhm.
people, are there a few because it's. I think maybe it's changed now, but maybe when you were there was less diversity. Just like India, we don't have much diversity in terms of
Yeah.
international people. So, what was it like in terms of diversity and inclusion at Wells Fargo? What did you have to did you have to face any challenges or discrimination? How did you
Well,
deal?
I think let me answer the easier one first. Let me answer China. I think maybe it was a little bit of both. But again, to be honest, it was like always, oh, you're American. So that was a, oh, you're American, but you're still pointed, people are touching, you're fat, but over, and also too, 30 years in, was kind of used to that. But it was always, oh, you're American. I think for China, it was more, I think, stereotypical, right? I told the story of how my student wanted to send me out, excuse me, the salesperson wanted to send me to a corporate client who only wanted to learn slang, only wanted a woman teacher, and wanted to learn hip phrases so he could pick up chicks. And I'm like, why would you send me? What? Well, Lisa, he wants to learn slang. I'm like, I don't. Why would I be teaching slang? So what? I mean, but also again, no frame of no, again, what do you do in a situation like that? I'm trying to explain it to someone who has no frame of reference, right? So luckily, my boss is like, I know I went. I did go. Um, and to be honest, I found the situation, it was more sexual harassment than anything. And that's a whole other story, right? That's not even kind of in here as female expats. That's something that was never even on my radar. But I saw that more than enough, to be honest, with some of my corporate clients. I'm teaching and the gentleman keeps touching the one. I mean, what, I don't, I don't, how that fits in. That's a whole other story.
Right.
Wells Fargo, I have to be honest, when I was at Wells Fargo, this is pre-Wachovia. Um, they were really considered kind of a huge bank, a great bank. It was just an old Midwestern bank. I think I was the only person of color. Oh, I know I was the only like senior management within the international department. I really was. I was certainly nothing, and I managed an office in Hong Kong, so it was, again, I would say there were more stereotypes than anything. I spent a lot of time. Oh, we'd have the annual party. Oh, Lisa, you'll win the dancing contest because you can dance. It was more stereotypical. I think I told the incident we had, and I don't even remember what the incident was. It could have even been a discussion with HR from Asia, and she was talking about me. I don't even remember what it was, and talking about another person of color from South Africa, and she didn't kind of really know different. I think maybe she had studied in South Africa, So she didn't really see a distinction, which I think is a common issue that, probably don't talk about enough. He's South African, I'm American. She didn't really see it. I was somewhat lucky in that my boss had spent a lot of time in HR. So, she understood that. Um, did I have a lot of, I think also too, sometimes even within the United States, I was an African American woman. I had a global background. I was from New York. I think it was sometimes it's just too much for them to take, you know what I mean? Like they can't peg you. So you have this, so okay, we'll just kind of stand by and see what you do. And for me, I would always let my work, work for me is the great equalizer, work and results. I will say one thing about, so since we're on that, a lot of what the research and things like that are from the corporate standpoint and the workforce. But one of the things I thought about, now we have digital nomad visas, people are working remotely, people are working freelancing. Even a lot of people in your audience, when I spoke in San Francisco, they have their own business. So how do you manage diversity, and inclusion if you're in that situation? A lot of people are sitting at home, right? So I wonder, are companies, when they're onboarding people, is that important? Right? I look at people who are digital nomads, they just want to be by themselves, they want to work wherever. Is that even on their radar? Professionally, it might not be unless they have to work with, their colleagues around the world, but that's still from a distance. But what are you doing in your personal life? And I don't think enough people are speaking about that. And I hear a lot of people, I think I mentioned this before, they want to move abroad. Oh, I need to go somewhere where it's LGBT friendly, or I need to go somewhere where there are mostly people who look like me. Okay, right? I'm not sure. Like I always say, if are you going to find, especially, I'm really specifically speaking to people who would be a freelancer or they have their own company, digital nomad. Because when you're a corporate expat, right, and the corporation is paying for certain things, you have to kind of do certain things, and there's usually an infrastructure, right? You might have a local office you go into, but when you're really on your own, how are you kind of going to manage that, right? If let's say I have a digital nomad in, I don't know, Thailand, and I'm mostly sitting in my office, how am I building community? Or if I do run into an issue where I feel someone is discriminating against me, what are my protections, or what am I going to do if I'm working remotely and I'm a digital nomad? Have I built a community? Do I know what's legal, not legal? I think that's an overwhelming question we kind of haven't gotten to. Another thing I wanted to mention with the corporate research that I thought was interesting is, like, in America, we always say DIEI and diversity is good for business. But other countries, especially Europe, were like, it's more about doing the right thing. Of course, everyone talked about it's important that everyone has a seat at the table, everybody's voice is represented, which and the whole, everybody is the at global, think local. But, as I mentioned when I was in San Francisco, we have to also be careful of that, right? Because what translates and makes sense in the US, and someone in the audience gave that perfect example. I think it was, I don't remember the company, but it was France, and it translated into something that might even be totally offensive, or, well, it definitely didn't make sense, right? It didn't make sense to people, and a lot of times global companies, and this came up in the research, they spend the money and they spend the time, and they're just saying, oh, well, we'll just export it to the office in France, the office in the United Kingdom. Maybe they send one person, or they do train the trainer. And we need to go deeper than that. One of the things that came up, you might find this interesting, because I know you've talked about dialects and accents and things like this. They talked about, like, we may need to do things like getting rid of the perfect English bias, which holds some organizations back from leveraging global talent. And I'll share the link if you're interested. I looked it up, but I didn't know people had a perfect English bias. But I've experienced that myself. It could be somebody correct. People think it's okay. Oh, you were an English teacher, but you said, I can't remember what country or something. I said Siam Reap in Cambodia. Oh, that's not how it's said. That's kind of it was another American. That's kind of rude, but okay. Um, and it's interesting that some of the things, don't correct people's English unless they speak. Don't judge people's intelligence based on their English fluency, and don't understand. Don't assume people understand you because you're a native English speaker. So I think there are some things about that that's important. As an international manager, I definitely faced it. I think I told you I used to manage a portfolio in the border towns and had to deal with Spanish speaking people.
Right.
So I thought that was
Actually,
interesting.
I
How,
want to jump in. Oh, sorry, I
no,
want to jump in with the native English speakers because there are so many countries that have been colonized by the British, right?
right.
Countries in Africa, countries in
That's
like
right.
Hong Kong, India. So the, to me, this is such a interesting topic because I would consider myself a native English speaker because I grew up speaking English,
Right.
mainly British English, because our schools were in the old days run by the British, so that continued. My great grandparents adopted English as their first language.
Hmm.
So yeah, because I'll share a link to the video where I talk
Oh, I
about.
saw a little bit of the video. I did.
Yeah, yeah, you saw that, right?
Mhm.
So, or someone that comes from African country which is colonized by the British, and they speak perfect English, but they have the accent of that country.
Right.
So to me, the only really native English speakers might be the British, not the Americans,
Right.
because
I
that's where
understand what you're saying.
the birthplace of
Yeah.
English. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but that's another topic in itself, the whole accent thing. But
Yeah.
we are kind of running out of time, so I did want to ask you
Sure.
about what should expats do and not do in terms of diversity and inclusion. Are there any implementable tips? Because you've shared a lot in this
Hmm.
conversation, but someone's moving to another country, or they're dealing with a global workforce, or they already moved to that country. What can they do to, in terms of understanding inclusion and diversity in that country, and also making people aware of their differences? Like sometimes we need to educate the people in the country we move to, right? Just like you
Yeah.
spoke about that manager in England calling you, referring
Color.
to a person of color, colored woman, so stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I definitely have that. So I think the first thing, as I always go back to preparation, right? And I think you hit on it. We all have biases, right? So we always have to recognize that we all have biases. And then the other thing, when you're doing your prep work, what's your expectations? Well, I expect that everybody is going to look like me, and I expect that everybody's going to bow down because I'm American. A lot of times it comes back to the prep. People don't do a lot of times they don't do the research, and they don't think about the bad stuff, right? What happens if someone says that to you, or worse, sexual harassment, or something like, or someone judges you based on something else, and speaks on it, right? And also, when you're doing your research, you do have to find, well, if I slap him, is that legal? Or is that legal for him to say that? For me, you always have to know which battles to pick and what lines you're going to cross, right? In America, if some of these incidents we've talked about happen, what would you do? You would go to HR. What if there is no HR? What if there is no infrastructure? How are you going to handle it? Are you going to, as you just said with the gentleman in the UK, am I going to seek to educate him? I could have. I think I was in shock. I could, and he was my boss. I could have said, I prefer to be called, or I'm sorry, why, do you know in the US, colored has a blah, blah, blah. But the other thing, and we talked about this in San Francisco, he could have said, so what? I don't care, right? Some countries, and I'm going to say countries because that encompasses the culture and your personal life and the workplace, they don't care. Or maybe, as someone said in San Francisco, I don't want to misspeak. I think she was from Poland. She's just aren't that many, right? Or maybe there are diverse, or there are pockets of people. So you really have to know the lay of the land, preparation, realize that you have biases, spend some time if that's important to you, thinking about what's, some people have the attitude, and I'm kind of, I'm going to this country because I like it and whatever. And if I experience that, that's a bad experience. That's not everybody, right? Or it's the culture, right? I think you had this before. Somebody mentioned in the group, I think it was you, people pointing, and you explained it from your point of view. That's something I had to get used to Asia 20 years ago. Some people, I know, I've been to conferences and stuff in Asia, they can't stand it. They can't stand the picture taking. It annoys them. They go berserk. They can't stand the touching. They can't stand the pointing. We all have to know where to draw the line, especially if you've chosen to live there,
Right.
right? You want to live there. Nobody's forced, unless, to live there. I'm not saying you need to be a doormat, but you need to decide what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept. Again, there may not be the infrastructure to help you. You always, or maybe you don't. Hey, I don't. If something happened to me, somebody hit me, assault, whatever. Maybe I don't want to go to the police. Maybe I don't feel comfortable going to the police or going to the doctor. So you need, and sometimes you can prep, but until it happens to you, remember I got sick in China. I was like, I really want to go to the doctor, but right, I had to. So I always say preparation. We all have our biases, and the other thing is, we said this before, and I always say this to people: racism is global. It's a globe. There are always biases, and people have their own version of diversity and different people. It's everywhere. So sometimes I think people with this, one of your folks in San Francisco, romanticizing countries. Stop it. I don't. If there's a utopia, you and I can go tomorrow. So I think, people. I still see people. I'm sorry. I feel like always I'm a broken record. I say it's with finances, but I still see people move overseas and they don't prep. They just show up, and then they're on Facebook and everywhere else, and they're complaining. Or they're like, well, I don't know why people don't do this. And I don't, well, because that's not your country, right? If you want that, then you need to be at home. The whole purpose, as you said, of seeing the world and having different experiences is just that. It's different, and nobody is forcing you to live there unless it's, something you've chosen to go there, or something like that. So I still see a lot of people, they just, they're more concerned about, well, how many things do I need to pack, and what, no real preparation on their finance, no real prep on, really, right? Diversity, inclusion, equity. How are you going to build community? Not only, let's say, if you're in the corporate world at your company, and when you can't work 24 hours a day, right? So how are you going to build relationships outside of that? What if no one wants to build a relationship with you? This is the other thing I thought of. I'll close with this. What if no one, right? At least now we have remote work. You can FaceTime with people. You can join groups virtually. That's something you do. Because I was talking to someone, and we know this person. She had a seminar, and in the country she's in, she said she doesn't have many friends. And I thought, wow, what if you can't build, for whatever reason? I mean, she travels a lot, things like that. How do you, build community? Or where she is in Africa, there's the rich, affluent, and there's the poor. One of the things about the middle class is it ties the two together. But in some countries, if you have that, the two shall never meet, right? So that's how I'll end. I hope
Thank
everybody
you.
enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I see Barbara, another member from of
Yes, I see this.
says
Thank you, Barbara.
preparation. Yeah, thanks, Barbara. She says preparation is the key to understand and create expectations.
I
I
like
so
that.
agree. It's
Yeah.
really, thanks, Barbara, for sharing that and joining us. But thank you, Lisa. You shared so many valuable tips and so many things to think about,
Yes.
because there's not, for a lot of it, there are no answers and there are no solutions, because
That's right.
I mean, the global diversity and inclusion is it's not really global in many ways, because it, as you say, and as Barbara also said, the expectations, the perceptions of,
Hmm.
stereotypes. There's so much. I mean, I've been in the US 21 years. I'm still learning. I still learn every day about
That's
things in
right.
the US, right? Or because the US is, and it's not just the US culture. If you live in a country like the US or Canada or New Zealand, which is very multicultural, you're also having to learn about other people's cultures and being
Sure.
sensitive to them. So it's not just, so that's also something to keep in mind. or in a country like India, which has, you know, people, it's on, India's like a country because people from different states have different
That's
languages.
right. That was in the research as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's also within a country. You can't stereotype the whole country because
Right.
even the color of the skin, people in the south are darker, people in the north are very light, you
Mhm.
know. So you can't say how come you don't look like a typical Indian because it's so diverse,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Right.
it's
Right.
just
Yeah,
yeah. So I feel
you
these this.
can't have a measuring stick.
Sorry, go ahead.
You can't have a measuring stick.
Right,
Like, yeah. No,
right.
that's true. That's true about India. And I've been to India. That's true. Yeah.
And I'm sure in some other countries too, it could be similar. So anyway, this is such a fabulous
You're
discussion,
very
Lisa.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you for joining us again. How can people learn more about you, connect with you,
Mhm.
find out about you? You have something
I'm
coming?
always around. You can go to my website. That no, people shouldn't go to my website. I need to revamp it, and there's something wrong with the back end. But I'm on Facebook a lot. I'm trying to build Instagram. You can join my group. That's what I would really like, living a global lifestyle, because I always want to put out content and have engagement. But you can really find me on Facebook because that's where I'm also learning and keeping my ear to the ground about what people's concerns are, what their financial concerns are, with my experience. How can I add value? How can I help them? Because I want people to lead their best lives where they are abroad, if they're traveling, if they're a digital nomad, if they're going to be an expat. So Facebook is where you can find me a lot, but I'd be great if people join the group Living a Global Lifestyle. And I'm still working on my digital products. Most of them will be financial. And then we have our event in July, which I'm really excited about, right? I'm very excited about that. And I'm trying to put together all this stuff, and I have all these people I want to invite. So I'm really excited about that. That's kind of stuff that I'm working on.
Fantastic. So Lisa will it's streaming on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So I'm going to have you share the links on both
Okay.
pages so
Okay.
people can then join your group, connect
Okay.
with you on LinkedIn, learn about your event,
Yes.
and talk about finances. Next week, I'll have another member from the Expat Women, another founding member, Sandra Monroe, talking about expat taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Sandra reached out to me. Yeah, I'm gonna catch
a
them.
very important topic, right? And before we go, we're both drinking from the dual citizen cups. Least, actually, neither of us is dual citizens. Even though I'm originally from India, India doesn't allow us to have dual citizenship.
Like Japan, right? There's some countries that don't. I didn't know
Yeah,
that. I didn't know
I'm
that.
just an American citizen now, and I know, lived in China, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure if you could, you would have dual citizenship because so
Yeah.
that's our cups. But thank you for joining us. If you're
Oh,
interested in the Extra Woman membership, I'll share a link to that in the comments. Lisa and I have a lot of other amazing members like Barbara who are members, and I go live every Tuesday on the Expat Woman Show. So I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you. Bye,
thank
everyone.
you. Bye bye.